Hello, good evening, everybody. I am really excited to be going live with the lovely Virginia. Oh, hang on. So, yes, I'm talking to Virginia, who is a co founder of the Pelvic Pain Network. And we wanted to do a live. Oh, she's here. Oh, I can't see you. Yes, I can.
Wow.
We did it.
I can see myself. Can I see you?
Oh, I should be split screen with you.
Oh, that's all right. Let's have a look. There's a split screen, but I just can't see your lovely face.
Oh, how weird.
But
I can see me. Oh, well, as long as you can hear me,
I
we'll go
can
with.
see you beautifully, which is a lovely
Oh,
treat.
how funny. Just anyone on this live, can you see me? Just so that I know, because I can see myself, but I don't want the whole world out there just to not see my face. Can someone just say you can see me in the comments, and then we'll all be good. I'll wait for someone to say something. But I was just saying, we wanted to do this live. We've been talking about, oh yeah, we can see. Yes, you can see me. Okay, yay. Yeah. I was saying we want to do this live, and we've been talking about it for ages, which is part of it, but we wanted to do it this month because it is Endometriosis Awareness Month. Now, through our conversation, we will obviously be talking about endometriosis, but we are going to talk about the kind of wider topic of pelvic pain. So, for anyone who doesn't know you, tell us about yourself. Obviously, we're in the Pelvic Health Physio crew, massive, which we all love, and we're all good friends. But tell everyone about yourself, about the Pelvic Pain Network, and then I've got questions, so we'll go through them, and then anyone who's got a question tonight, also put them in the comments, and we will make sure we're just going to flow. So we'll just see where the evening takes us.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. It's after a day of research deadlines today. It's a genuine joy to be with you this evening. So my name is Virginia, and I'm a pelvic health physio, which if you follow Claire, you are probably very well versed in the fact that we look after bladder, bowel, sexual health, anything across the life course that happens within your pelvis and gives you some bother. And my particular area of interest and training and research is in persistent pelvic pain. So that's pain anywhere in your pelvis that lingers for more than the 3 to 6 months that you might expect if you've got an area of healing or something that you hope that you might kind of recover quickly and easily from. So I've worked, and I still work in the NHS and now private practice as well, looking after women and men. Predominantly my caseload is women with persistent pelvic pain, and partly out of tricky challenges with women getting the care they might need in the NHS, and partly looking for this universal access across the UK. Gilly Bond and myself, who've done teaching together, training together over many years, decided in a moment of overexcitement possibly to get cracking and be the change that we want to see. So we've created a network of physios, but with also other collaborators across the medical specialties to try and make it easier for women to get the excellent care that we know is available, but actually is really tricky for people to get. When I used to work in London in one of the main multidisciplinary teams for this persistent pelvic pain, we had women coming over from Northern Ireland, from Scotland, from Wales. And my mother lives in Pembrokeshire in West Wales. And I wouldn't want her to have worse care than someone living in central London. So that's kind of the goal of what we're doing with the Pelvic Pain Network, is to try and make that accessible. What I'm then doing slightly sillily is working in the NHS, trying to improve things there, working with the Pelvic Pain Network and putting in a research grant to look at how we can actually learn from the experiences of women to improve the access to care, because that's what we hear about all the time.
Absolutely. And I know we struggle as clinicians because we're like, we think these things work and we think this, and we have, a lot of lived experience as well, but we sometimes struggle to back it up, don't we, with research. But having heard you and Jilly speak at a conference we were at last year now, essentially we have to start at the grassroots, identify the problem, identify how we can even assess the problem before we can then almost work towards a solution. And that's why things just take years. Now, that doesn't mean, I always say to women in clinic, just because I don't have a concrete paper that I can maybe quote you on everything and it's as robust, doesn't mean there aren't lots of things that we can do. But I think that's why we sometimes struggle especially with the NHS, to get as many networks within the NHS doing what you guys are doing, because obviously we need as much robust evidence for funding, and that's just where it all often comes back to. But I'm so excited because there's more and more work going into this area. And I think even just having these conversations, because I've been amazed in the last year, having done a few bits in the press, even about the fact that physio could help those who suffer with endometriosis, how many women have suddenly said, well, hang on a second, physio, what? And I think that's what I'm really excited that we can do this evening, is open up that conversation as to say where we might have a role in supporting those who are struggling, when actually I think there's still a hugely medical lens given to a lot of these. Obviously we're medical professionals, so what I mean by medical is more the kind of medicine, surgery and things like that. So going to get to my questions. I know we wanted to talk, because I think obviously really helpful is actually defining what do we mean by chronic, which we're now moving towards the term persistent, aren't we?
Yeah. So, and to be honest, you'll still find clinicians, researchers, experts across the field who still disagree about whether it should be chronic or persistent. So, the reason why my bias, my slight leaning is towards persistent, is that some of the patient groups prefer it, which is always a win. But also, if you talk to people about what does chronic mean, actually, the first thought often isn't length of time, like we're taught in school, physio school. They think chronic is about severity.
Yeah.
I went to uni up in Liverpool, and they definitely, if something was chronic, it was not good. So what we're trying to do is just describe the experience and describe the symptoms. So when we're talking about persistent pain, whether it be a persistent back pain, persistent pelvic pain, is pain that persists. Because if we think about when you sprain your ankle or you knock yourself, really you might have a bruise and some healing going on there for a good 6 weeks or so. But actually we know that some pain can persist beyond that early phase of healing because of changes that are widespread, often through the nervous system. And that's where a UTI, something nasty like urinary tract infection, or for some of our perinatal women, an episiotomy or recurrent thrush, starts off with something that might be short-lived, but then might become recurrent. And then as the nervous system changes over that period of time, then unfortunately sometimes you can get persistent symptoms. Yeah. So when we're talking about women with persistent or chronic pelvic pain, it can be anywhere in the pelvis. So it can be endometriosis associated inside the tummy. It can be in the vulva underneath. It can be in the bladder. But it's the pain that persists. And some of those syndromes, like bladder pain syndrome, there's a lot of overlap, unfortunately, sometimes within the pelvis. And what we tend to notice is that you can now get, or not now get, what we now call chronic overlapping pain syndromes, where lots of women who come and see me in clinic with endometriosis symptoms think that their bladder symptoms might be separate, or the vulval symptoms on the outside might be separate, because they can't see a clear explanation linked with their endometriosis. Yes. But the way you can compare it is a bit like having noisy neighbours. Because of the way the nerves work in the pelvis, there's so much cross communication between the different organs and structures within the pelvis. For the same reason why if you have period pain, you often can't pinpoint it with one finger. You're often using whole hands across your tummy, whole hands across your lower back. Yeah. We have specificity, like you might do if you bang your little finger. So actually, it's evolved for a good reason, to help make our pelvic organs very robust in case of injury. But it does mean there's a lot of crosstalk, and that's how persistent pelvic pain can sometimes reflect a diagnosis of endometriosis. Yeah. And it can also reflect these other pain syndromes that unfortunately can coexist.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful. But I often talk about how, obviously within our healthcare system, because we need specialities, and that's really, really important, because we all need to be good at certain things and know a lot more, because not one person can know everything. But I think how it conditions us is to view the body as incredibly separate. And I always say, as pelvic health physios, where I guess we slightly differ, or how we, I think, have a huge privilege, is we have more of a bird's eye view. And I think that's what we often are doing with those that we sit with in clinic, is though they may have seen a urologist and a colorectal doctor and maybe a surgeon, and there's not been a lot of cross chat about the things that they're experiencing, we get that time and the ability to do that. And so I think that's where physio can bring a different dimension and can be helpful, and look at more the kind of longer term, what are you living with, what's bothering you, what are your symptoms, and how do we make a plan out of this, which isn't necessarily medicine or surgery. We may have done those things, and I'm very always clear that it's always a team approach, and that's what you've created at the Pelvic Pain Network. Is it's about a team. None of us are saying I am the full solution. It's saying that we all, and actually that's research based.
Yeah.
You know, it clearly states that the best outcomes we can have for those who are experiencing, you know, persistent pelvic pain is to work together as a team and view it as one body. Now, what I'd love to ask just on the back of that is, I know how hard it can be when we start talking about the nervous system to not then feel this idea that is it therefore kind of not real. Obviously we appreciate the nervous system is real and we can understand the nerves communicate with our brain, but I know a lot of the time women come away from some of these conversations where we start to go down that kind of understanding of pain science, I guess is the kind of easiest way to talk about it, and it can make you feel a bit like, well, is there not a real problem there anymore? What would you say to that? Because I think that's such an important conversation to have.
And do you know what? That's a conversation I've been having a lot recently with women who are on the NHS waiting list for laparoscopy.
Okay.
So with the team that I work with in the NHS, we have a great team. The medical staff will meet them first of all. They'll have been referred in by a GP because of symptoms that might be suggestive of endometriosis, or they've got trickier pattern of complex pelvic pain that needs further investigation. And depending on what ultrasounds they've had, what other imaging they've had, some of them, the surgeons will suggest that they might need laparoscopy, the keyhole surgery, to have a look inside their pelvis, to look to see if endometriosis is clearly visible there, if it hasn't been visible in other investigations. And one of the conversations that we have when the consultants will often say, do you know what, let's get you cracking with physio while we're waiting for the laparoscopy to help you with the symptoms you've got. Women will sometimes, quite understandably, because the awareness of physio isn't out there, will say, well, hang on, should I see you now? Or should I wait until I know if I've got endometriosis?
Yeah.
They often see it as, understandably, well, maybe they need that clarity before cracking with something else.
Yeah.
So the way I try and describe it is in the same way that you treat back pain or another part of the body. The first thing I'm asking them about is how it's bothering them, how it's impacting them, what their symptoms are. And then one of the other things we move on to is what would better look like? What do they want to see change? And for some women, that might be a happier bladder, happier bowel, happier sex, being able to go to work, avoiding those kind of flare-up weekends or weeks where they're incapacitated. And then what we do is we find a treatment plan, a flare-up toolkit that works for the symptoms they're describing, whether or not there may be active endometriosis lesions as part of that picture, because we know that unfortunately the newest evidence, the newest survey from Endometriosis UK says that whereas we used to say it takes about 7 years to get a diagnosis, the most recent data from women is it's over 8 years from diagnosis of endometriosis.
Yeah.
So we know that when you've had pain for that long, there will have been some of these secondary changes. And therefore, it's not to say that physio would replace any other part of a surgical pathway for endometriosis. I work very closely with other members of the team, but it's to say, actually, there's so much we can do to optimize your bladder, optimize your bowel, optimize your pelvic floor, get that sexual function improving, look at how you go to work, look at how you get to enjoy that time with friends and family. It's exactly what you said, we're patient-led and trying to take a whole person view. And it's not an either or.
Yes.
Hopefully then they feel more supported, because there are long waits at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I have women who are even in the system, and even once you've got an appointment, it's then a long wait between decision and, I don't like the word solution, or next steps is probably the right term, doing something else. So I think that's really helpful, and thank you for kind of going with that. We wanted to talk a little bit, you kind of alluded to this kind of idea of things overlapping and having a close relationship. So I wondered if you could give us like a brief overview into some of those that are like, what is bladder pain syndrome? What is vulvodynia? How do we kind of, I guess, get these terminologies, that sort of stuff? Because I know I even spoke to Jilly last year when I was writing my book, and I kept having to message her being like, has the terminology changed? And she's like, wait up, it's changed again. And I was like, by the time I've written this book and it's gone to publication, it probably will have changed again, and I had to kind of make peace with that. So I think that's so tricky, as well as if you're someone who's navigating the system and people keep calling things differently, you know, headache in itself. So I guess run us through some of these kind of names, these terminologies, and what they mean.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, solidarity on keeping up with the terminology, because I wrote a textbook chapter in lockdown, which I'm now almost embarrassed that's been delayed so long that by the time it comes out, it's going to be almost out of date. Yes. I think the most important thing whenever I talk to women, friends, family, whoever, is describing where your pain is and how long you've had it for is the starting point to any of these conversations.
Right.
So you don't have to know exactly what the Lancet is saying this week. You need to know is where hurts and the fact that it's been going on long enough to cause you bother.
Yeah.
See, a lot of the descriptors are becoming more and more simplistic to try and make that easier.
Right.
You can talk about pain in the vulva as vulvodynia, or if it's in the little area called the vestibule, vestibulodynia is how my patients say it. But actually, there's a reason why the Vulval Pain Society, a charity, is called the Vulval Pain Society. Because actually, if we can just describe pain as where it is, you're more likely to find the information you need, and you're probably more likely to get the care you need. So we talk about bladder pain syndrome. It's exactly that. It's pain in the bladder.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's called bladder pain syndrome is it's a diagnosis of exclusion, which means that you will have had the test to rule out an infection. You will have likely had a camera to look for anything inside. And we know that you're still living with pain, even though we can't find anything that would respond to treatment for infection or any other local treatments. And that we think it's more to do with a pain that's feeling like it's in the bladder and affected by the nerves in the bladder. It can disrupt your bladder function, like how often you go to the loo, how quickly you want to go to the loo. And so it is characterized and defined as pain that persists, just like these other pelvic pains, more than 3 to 6 months, at the exclusion of some of these other things like infection.
Yeah.
So slightly to some of the recurrent UTIs. But actually you can see how if you think you've got a nervous system that is giving you bladder pain, and we've got those noisy neighbors next door, you can see how so many of our women who've lived with endometriosis pain for a very long time, and researchers in the US have proven that recurrent painful periods can unfortunately contribute to this kind of widespread pain within the pelvis in later life, have patterns of pain, repeated pain, that then can result in that crosstalk. So that instead of it just being localized pain in the uterus when it comes to menstrual pain, that it ends up being vaginal pain, vulval pain, bladder pain syndrome.
Yes.
And something else they've seen is that as pelvic health physios, we often look at the chronic overlap in the pelvis with the bladder pain, the vulvodynia, the IBS in the bowel. Actually, researchers have looked at the whole person and have found the relationship between some of the chronic overlapping pain syndromes that are whole person. So fibromyalgia or tension migraine headaches or TMJ, jaw pain, that actually a lot of these pain syndromes, unfortunately, because some of their mechanisms can overlap, can have this crosstalk across the whole nervous system, not just within the pelvis.
Yeah, and like that's it, isn't it? It's again like understanding that whole self, body, mind, and that's why I always say to people, you know, ultimately it's understanding that a nervous system is everywhere. So though organs sit in locations, the nervous system is like a map. It's like, you know, like when you see like the motorway map across the UK and they all connect up somehow, that's how I view the nervous system. I'm not sure what the brain is at the M25 in the center or something, I'm not sure, but that's how I view it, you know. And I think that's how it's very helpful to, that's why I always make this sort of joke with people that as pelvic health physios we deal with everything between the nipples and the knees, but then I'm like, actually it's not true, because we actually just deal with the whole body. Though we have this very specialist knowledge about the pelvis, there's no way that any of us treat anybody without thinking about the mind, the brain and the nervous system, because you know, we are one. I think what would be helpful then now to think about with that context is this, I guess, this terminology that I think we're all more familiar with, this, what the biopsychosocial model of healthcare is, because I think more and more people are hearing about this, but they're suddenly like, what does that mean? And how does that relate to, I guess, my experience now?
Great question. So I think the most important thing to say to anyone in pain, and I might repeat myself because I'm picking a new favorite thing. The most important thing that I think we can say to anyone in pain is, I believe you,
Yes.
believe what you're telling me about your pain. And I think that's one of the things we challenge with. We have challenges within the healthcare system, partly to do with, you know, first consultations, duration to get care, the gender pain gap between men and women. And I think that's something I'm always careful of when I talk about the biopsychosocial model of pain. Because as soon as anyone hears the word psychosocial as part of the bio, they think we're trying to break you up into the people who've got a physical problem and the people who haven't. And actually, what this talks about is that it's all inextricably linked.
Yes.
You are one of those three corners of the triangle. Everyone is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
But what it talks about is that no one is one organ in isolation. We are whole people.
Yeah.
Tonight, I'm slightly frazzled mum, but that doesn't mean that I haven't got all these other organs as part of me too.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the biopsychosocial model, it's to say and to acknowledge that people are complex.
Yes.
Be complex. And we have to kind of embrace the person in front of us coming to us with their pain in their complexity. Tell us your story from the beginning. Let's really understand how you got where you are today. Let's understand what you've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what's been tested, who you've spoken to, what's happened so far, knowing that we really, as pelvic health physios, are never just looking at a pelvis. And that's similarly with continence, with other things, with bowels. We know that if you get on a plane, it'll affect whether your bowels happen the next day. It's not just what happens in your rectum. And that kind of relationship and knowing that your whole person and your whole experience will affect your pain.
Yes.
And I think the reason why some of us are a bit cautious about explaining that is we're so worried that without nuance, it's like we're saying it's not biological.
Yeah.
And it's not at all. We're saying it's all of those things.
Yes.
And actually, to give you the best possible care, we have to look at all of those things. And one of the things that I say to women, particularly if I'm working with a health psychologist, a clinical psychologist, is when we're looking at how a psychologist might help you with your symptoms, it's never to say that the pain is in your head. And that having pain is pants. Having pain can make you feel pants. And this just stops you doing all the things that you might normally do to bring yourself joy, to enrich your day, to fill your cup. So actually, if we could get an extra specialist in this team to look at that impact and tools for that side and that aspect of the pain, it can help give you a more full package of care. It's not necessarily that it's that care in isolation, but again, the overlap and the complexity of some of this pain and the fact that we all need biopsychosocial care.
Totally.
And the social often gets left out of that. People often focus on the bio and the psycho.
Yeah.
Actually, we know for a fact that there's data to say that actually the people who are more supported in different communities across the world, where you have social interaction, where you have social interactions that are meaningful to you, can really help your whole health.
Totally.
Helps your life expectancy.
Yeah. And you know, I think about, as you're talking, like looking back to my, you know, just my life, not even thinking necessarily about pain, but, you know, like if we think about the pandemic and what all of us experienced, you know, definitely when I was on my own in a house with two young children for days, in essence on end, yes, my husband came home from work, but it didn't feel like I had a community. My window of tolerance, when I was also not getting any sleep because I had a newborn, and I had, was a lot smaller. And I think that that idea of window of tolerance for me, and that's more of a psychological term I'm fully aware of, but is that idea of like, how much capacity do we have? And actually, obviously, when we're in pain or we're stressed with work and there's something else, and I know sometimes people do it with glasses of like, we only have so much capacity. And actually, if something's filling it, we will lack for something else. And I think sometimes it's helpful to just almost remove pain and look at other areas of our life and think how that relates. And actually, we can then think about then how when we add pain into that conversation, how actually that makes sense. And I think I'm learning more and more just about my own nervous system, that how much, especially as a mum, I think we have to regulate so much to help regulate kids, right? And actually we have to know what our nervous system needs so that we can help their nervous system. And I think this is where the whole conversation of really just understanding a nervous system in its, and I don't think, I mean, even if I think back on my physio education, hugely lacking in understanding of a nervous system. I don't know about you, but I definitely didn't feel.
Yeah, particularly in a holistic way.
Yeah.
We were taught about nerve testing, weren't we?
Yes.
Check the reflexes, check that there's not a squashed nerve, a compressed nerve.
Yeah.
Looking at human behavior, I
Yeah.
think, would be underlooked too. The nervous system as a whole and human behavior. Because, like you said, I know that I'm snappy at the moment. I've got
Yeah.
deadlines. I don't deal with the bedtime as well as I would normally. But I also know that women I meet in clinic, whether it be endometriosis, surgical journey, non-surgical journey, mesh complications that I work with a lot, people in pain often talk to me about an anger, a grief, a loss.
Yeah.
Because particularly for these young women, and there'll be people listening now who started having painful periods in their early teens. And that disrupted those formative years of social interactions, social activities, even the boring bits of finishing your school day. And they talk understandably about an anger, of
Yes.
that maybe things weren't, shared. They were young women. They needed probably help on the journey.
Yeah.
Others around them to say, do you know what, you should probably talk to someone about that. That's common, but it's not normal.
Yeah.
The loss of I've got some patients I'm working with at the moment who, they started uni, but they weren't able to carry on because of the symptoms at that time. And one of our goals is to actually feel like they're back in control, so that they're no longer counting the things that they're missing out on or grieving a period of their lives like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so relevant and not really talked about just in our society. I mean, I guess I've done that journey with a lot of mums. Again, going back to the pandemic, I think it's just something I can really relate to. And a lot of women who are in clinic and the amount of losses that they had, and almost, I don't feel as a society we validate, because I mean, we do this a lot with birth as well, don't we? As long as everyone's alive, then everything below that is essentially invalid. And I always say, well, when we benchmark on death, it invalidates pretty much anything else possible.
There's no second step on that, is there? It's all on.
Can't really argue with that. That is obviously the worst, but it then invalidates everything. And I think you're 100% correct in that. I think validation of experience is so important, and just knowing that you're not alone. I mean, I guess you're probably the friend as well that, I get a lot of friends who message me being like, can I just run something past you? And I'm like, yeah, nothing's TMI, nothing's taboo, just say it how it is. And suddenly they're like, wow, like someone I can talk to about this. And I think we all need that, whether it's I've had a hard day as a mum, or I've got terrible periods, what on earth do I do? How do I navigate the system? Being validated and knowing you're not alone is so important. That's why I love what you guys are doing, because just having a place that I can send people and an Instagram account to be like, listen, go to this Instagram account, and you'll suddenly realize you're not alone. And I think that alone can just be enough to just break that, okay, there's a way forwards because there's other people doing this with me, when it can feel really isolating. So I guess that brings us on to what you guys are doing, the role of physio. So I guess give us a brief overview. I mean, what we do is extensive and would be different for every single person, is what I always say. But I guess is it going to be more traditional physio that people are going to experience, maybe to what they think about some hands-on treatment, or would it look different?
So ultimately, exactly as you said, depends what they bring with them as their main concerns. Because sometimes if someone's filled in a pre-assessment form, or you've got a referral letter, you'll read things and you start assuming, oh, that must be really impactful. That must be very bothersome. Let's get ready to help them tackle that. And actually, someone comes and sits down and talks to you. And actually, there's other things that are higher up their priority list at that time. So just like lots of other conversations you've had, we obviously want to try and give the right patient the right care at the right time.
Mm.
What we often do is, just like in other areas of pelvic health, start by asking quite a few questions about bladder, bowel, sexual function, pelvic pain, to understand how widespread the pain is or how localized the pain is. Because that's one of the things we know can make quite a big difference to how we would start care from a physiotherapy point of view. We know that there's now quite good research from North America pointing to some areas of pelvic pain responding to some types of physiotherapy treatment, whereas some widespread pain that comes out of the pelvis across other parts of your body requires more holistic whole person care, but we start putting our pelvic health hats on. That doesn't mean that pelvic health physio can't help them. It just means that we're kind of thinking holistically as pain physios rather than with our kind of pelvic biases straight away.
Yeah, helpful. Really, really helpful.
And when we think about the treatments, I know from some of your previous lives that people, when they understandably want quick wins, are actually genuinely excited that when we talk about some quick, easy ways to make your bladder a bit happier or to make your bowel a bit happier, it can give you such a sense of things going in the right direction and a sense of taking back some control, that it's often not those big monthly flare-ups that we can treat straight away. It's often starting off with the things that we know we can quite quickly change in the bladder, the bowel on the outside.
Yeah.
So people know, oh, actually, I'm making some gains.
Yes.
And actually, success before progress can make a really big difference to actually having the energy again. Because lots of the women I meet are already, they're exhausted, to be honest. Pain is exhausting in itself. You alluded to the fact that it disturbs your sleep. It's designed to take your brain's attention, so it's all consuming sometimes. And therefore, to have the little wins is one of my favorite quick ways to start treatment. Little tips for the bladder, little tips for the bowel, helping with the vulval care on the outside, so that you can see, oh, actually, this isn't going to stay this way forever. There's scope for change, there's potential for change. And that's one of the best things about tackling pain, is the same complexity that can make it difficult when it's coming on, means that there is plasticity and the scope for change. So whether it be women who've struggled for years with pudendal neuralgia, whether it be women with endometriosis, whether it be the recurrent urinary tract infections and bladder pain syndrome, we're not suggesting that there's going to be overnight miraculous change immediately, but there is real scope for change. I love the little wins to start with, particularly when we know that changing bowel habits, bladder habits can make a real difference to the rest of the pelvic sensitivity. Then, of course, we can move on to more specific pelvic floor strategies. And then I need to do that kind of preparation so that it's not a worry about flare-ups, knowing that a flare-up toolkit should be an early thought and not an afterthought. Because I think people worry, well, what happens when I finish physio? Do I see you forever? What do I do? And make sure that people know that actually bumps in the road do happen. We know that unfortunately persistent pelvic pain, whether it be endometriosis associated or an unknown cause, you can have these flare-ups. So making sure that people feel really empowered with an individualized flare-up toolkit, so they've that ready, almost like a grab bag. Sometimes it is a literal grab bag that you take with you to your course, but they've got that ready to go when they might need it with those flare-ups or just those spikes that sometimes do happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often speak with women, and that's, I guess, been on my own journey slightly as well, is just keeping the mind in check, because that's the hardest thing, I think. You know, it's very hard. Once symptoms flare, and they do, as you say, that's, you know, sometimes they don't and sometimes they do, but keeping that mind of like, well, where do I go from here? Because naturally we just go into like freeze mode of like, uh-oh, it's back, and I'm back there again. The way I often describe it with people is I'm like, you can never be there again, because you're not the same person, because you've got so much more knowledge than you did 3 months ago. So though it might feel the same, you're not the same, and therefore we can think, okay, how do we move, kind of try and leapfrog on to the next thing. And I think so much, and I guess this is where just a lot of reflecting as I wrote and stuff, how much empowerment there comes from actually just really knowing your body none see that there is a connection between everything down there and where everything is and where everything's, and how we breathe, and how the fact that our breathing is hugely influential, you know, all of these things, and again, that your breath you are in control of, and it's something that you can use in those moments of real crisis where you're like everything's just feeling, just I always say come back to the breath.
Yeah.
And that can be your, you know, your almost like your driver for everything else. And so I think I would say to women, it might sound basic at times, but actually again, this is stuff we are not taught and we're not told, and it can make huge differences.
And the breath is so powerful on multiple levels because we know that it can soothe the nervous system more broadly.
Yeah.
We also know that there's that connection between obviously pressure changing in your tummy from your diaphragm going up and down and the pelvic floor underneath.
Yeah.
So if actually on a okayish day, you've practiced some positions where you can relax your pelvic floor, do some beautiful belly breathing and find things that feel good for you.
Yes.
Then actually you've got that in your toolkit for the day that's not, they're not so good. It's not that you're kind of struggling for things when you're in that panic mode.
Totally.
Actually trying to future you, building that toolkit of the little tips and tricks, because we know that some women will have already discovered that they've got their favorite heat patch or their pajamas that, you know, when they're doing that kind of, I just need to be in my little self-care area, self-care zone, which feels safe. And safe is an important factor too. And I've spoken to other people about this idea that when we talk about the biopsychosocial model of pain, threat and safety is a really important part of that, because if you think about the fact that you might not like to poo somewhere new, but you're happy to poo at home, thinking about that in terms of context, it's not us saying bonkers for doing that. We can understand why you might have a favourite loo and why you might not want to go and poo outside in front of your neighbours. It's extraordinary to have those feelings.
Yes.
And so you're talking about safety and giving yourself that safety for your bladder function, for your bowel function, for your sexual function, and for your pain self-care is actually a natural way to soothe and to slightly hack the nervous system. So if you can find that comfortable position, the comfortable exercises, and a comfortable relationship with your team, because you must feel safe in therapy. We want you to feel comfortable talking about things openly, talking about things honestly, which still can sometimes feel like a taboo.
Yeah.
You don't feel like the place where you're getting help is a place to fear. And that's what I often feel like I'm undoing some of the time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a really important reflection for us all. And I think it's so easy sometimes when you're in busy clinics, isn't it, to feel like, you know, you haven't, as you do, as you say, with like in mum life, you suddenly go to bed and you're like, oh, I didn't deal with that situation the best. And like, we're all guilty of it as clinicians. I always say to people, like, none of us are perfect. We're all human. And sometimes we might need to own that we didn't deal with the situation very well. And I always say to people, you know, reflect back to me if I've maybe not dealt with things as well, or, you know, we're all different, you know, and some of us experience things more sensitively. Some people come in and be like, just say it how it is, I want to know everything. Some people are not. And I think that's really important. You know, different clinicians bring different things, and someone might connect with you, might connect with me, might connect with somebody else, and you know, that's also totally fine, is how I would view it. That's why I sometimes say about, you know, a GP, if you feel like maybe you've not been heard and not been validated, it can be hard to keep going back to see that person. It's okay to try and see somebody else and see differently. I think there has to be some flexibility in that.
And of course, that's to do with the intimate exams as well, because a lot of what we do after those long conversations to understand a woman's symptoms and her journey is to have a feel of the tummy, to have a look at the outside of their external genitalia, to suggest an internal exam to look at the pelvic floor function. So we've got to be in a trusting, safe relationship so that we can actually have a look and again see what the next layer of physiotherapy treatments might be able to offer.
Yeah, amazing. So I guess that brings, I mean, we could talk about this all night, and I hope we have, you know, started to open that conversation, and anyone that's maybe listened or is catching up, or any, you know, physios working in the area, or those looking for help, you know, I think, you know, as we say, it's conversations we need to be having more and more and more, and creating safe space for, but also knowing where we can send people if we're maybe not feeling 100% like we're the right person. What I'd love to know practically is, how does the Pelvic Pain Network work? So people understand, because I think that can be such a barrier to care, as you go on a website and like, oh, I don't really know, or you hear about something and you don't really understand what you're going to do. So just give us maybe the flow of how things might work, and then we can go from there.
Absolutely. So the reason we created the Pelvic Pain Network was because we wanted to be able to genuinely say to anyone in the UK, this is the care that I would offer my sister. This is the care that my best friend rang for recommendations. This is where I send you. Because that's what we've noticed before, is we all ring each other. We all want to know, actually, who do you trust for this particular thing or that particular thing? And then you're traveling across the country to get that care. And particularly people in pain, that's often not what you want. You don't want to be paying for a hotel room the night before to see the London expert if you don't need to. So what we've devised is a core group of physios who we trust, we've trained, we've worked together, particularly in persistent pelvic pain for a long time, as the first point of contact on a journey across multidisciplinary care if you need it. So it's a network that acts like a hub. So any woman with pelvic pain, whether that be bladder pain, vulval pain, IBS pain, endometriosis pain, pain of unknown origin that's persisted in their pelvis, can book an appointment to see a pelvic pain specialist physio with an online consultation as the first point of contact. So it doesn't matter where you are in the country. Now, the physio that's closest to you, because that might be easier for some of the follow-up appointments, or you can pick the one that's